Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thom Albrecht. Welcome to episode 3 of Safety Matters, a monthly webinar on pertinent safety and regulatory issues. Today's topic is about the safety of your cargo. Hence the title, Why the Explosion in Theft and Double Brokering in the Last 18 to 24 Months. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what to do about it. And it's been an explosion indeed. At the recent FreightWaves EP3 conference right here in Chattanooga, the CEO of truckstop.com shared a stat that year to date through October that 7,645 fraudulent or fake carriers had been removed from their system. And when she was asked about, well, what's a normal number? She said, we've never even been at 1,000 before. We're usually in a few hundreds for the full year. So it's been exploding and it's really a pandemic. With that, a little bit of a teaser, I'd like to introduce our two guests, my president, Chad Eichelberger, and then Scott Cornell of Travelers Insurance. Gentlemen, why don't you take about 30 seconds, tell us how long you've been connected to this crazy industry of trucking and what your current role is. Scott, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks for having me, Thom. I appreciate it. So for myself, I've been around trucking actually since I was 18. My first job out of high school was working in a warehouse, and then I ended up driving straight truck, and then I drove flatbed through college, and it just kind of kept going from there. So I've been here at Travelers for 22 years. I've been leading transportation since 2015, but I've been around cargo theft for about 27 or 28 years. My background is in investigations and specifically specializing in cargo theft investigations and supply chain security for several decades now.
That's great. Chad?
Yeah, thanks, Thom. So my background, so I'm currently a president at Reliance Partners. Obviously, we're in the commercial transportation insurance space. I've actually known Scott a long time. So prior to this, I was at a 3PL called Access America Transport, where I was president. That business we exited in 2014 to Coyote Logistics. I was president of brokerage at Coyote Logistics prior to joining Reliance Partners, and have known Scott for probably north of 13, 14 years, and happy to be on and always enjoy these conversations.
Absolutely.
Well, we're looking forward to a great conversation. Willie Sutton is a famous bank robber from the 1920s and 1930s. And one time he was asked, why do you rob the banks? And he said, well, it's where the money is. So gentlemen, are trailers the new banks for thieves? Has something, in other words, really what's changed in the last 18 to 24 months where this has gone from a problem to more of an epidemic? Chad, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think obviously a couple of things have changed. The dynamics of the industry, obviously the marketplace has been in a little bit of state of turmoil following COVID, where we saw unprecedented spikes. Now we are seeing just a period of time where rates are compressed, and you obviously have that factor. And that too, I think you have the emergence of a lot of really great solutions for offshoring, whether it be dispatching, whether it be any type of back office work. The voice over IP has become the standard in our space, where 10 years ago, it was really the larger freight brokerages and motor carriers had that. And so at this point, you can participate in our industry from anywhere in the world. And so I think you've had the convergence of this. Obviously, you've had the growth of freight brokers, which has created a great opportunity for small and mid-sized fleets to also have access to a good number of resources and different ways to take advantage of that from a revenue perspective. But at the same time, you've had the emergence of these players that are now preying on this space, and they see an opportunity and certainly are attacking that. And I mean, Scott and I have both talked about this a lot, and I'm sure from his perspective, he's seen probably 100 different ways it's happening.
Yeah, I would pretty much dovetail into what Chad is saying, which I think has a lot to do with the introduction of some of the technologies and the systems that have been introduced into the supply chain that are really designed to make the supply chain more efficient, to really bring ease of use, so to speak, to the supply chain. We always talk about how in America, everything has to be instant, right? We want everything when we want it right away. And so the supply chain has always tried to find ways to keep up with that demand. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the same things that the supply chain has put in place to make itself faster and more efficient are the exact same things that the cargo thieves are able to take advantage of. So when you talk about the voice over IPs and, you know, the ability to do this from anywhere and, you know, load boards, all those scenarios create a situation that the cargo thieves see as an opportunity. So we see them as efficiencies, they see them as opportunities. And, you know, Chad made a comment about you can be anywhere and do this, you know, participate in the supply chain. Well, the problem also becomes now you can be anywhere and participate in cargo theft. So we're seeing a lot of increased international involvement in cargo theft over the past several years. So when you talk about why the big, you know, explosion of it, well, it's ease of use, ease of committee, right? It's also supply and demand. It's the old-fashioned supply and demand. There's a slight economic, you know, one of the things I'm always asked is what does the economy have to do with cargo theft? It will have a slight impact on volume, but it more dictates what's being stolen and why it's being stolen than it does how much of it's being stolen. When it comes to the international portion of it, what we're seeing now, if we were doing this webinar 6-7 years ago, I would tell you 6 or 7 out of every 10 loads stolen would be found here somewhere in the United States, whether it was being sold online or at a flea market or being sold in bulk. We were chasing most of it here in the US. It's flipped. Now, I would tell you 6 out of every 10 loads is moving out of the country unless it's highly perishable. And that creates an international market for these stolen goods. And an international market is certainly much bigger than a domestic market. And so there's a demand there that's increased. And so all that comes into play to create the perfect storm for why are we having these big increases.
You know, Scott, let's go with that just a little bit more. So we talk about it's become more of an international problem, trying to get our domestic freight, if you will. Does that mean primarily Mexico and Canada, or is it really beyond North America as well?
No, it's over in Europe, Eastern Europe, all over. You know, in Europe, there's some in Mexico, there's some in South America. It really has become more of a global situation. You know, as long as I've been a cargo theft expert, one of the things, you know, if you will, that an expert has always said is, hey, tell me what's being stolen, tell me where it was stolen, I'll tell you where it's going, right? And it's always been kind of a skill set that you develop. And you know, that used to be much easier. It used to be, hey, if it was stolen in Memphis, it was going to Florida. If it was stolen in, you know, anywhere up the East Coast, it was going down to Florida. Now it's, you know, okay, it's going to Florida, but where's it going after that? And that's becoming a much more muddled picture than it has been in the past. You know, years ago, we used to talk about how stolen cell phone loads would go to South America pretty quickly. Right? They'd try and get them to Florida, they'd get them out through the port of Miami, and down to South America somewhere where they would, you know, flip them and sell them. We would see some, you know, started up here in the US, but the bulk of them would go to South America. Now it all depends, right? It all depends on what ring is stealing it. It's not as dependent on where it was stolen or what was stolen. It's more dependent on which ring is stealing it and where do they have ties to.
So does this suggest that the vetting process has fallen behind the times with traditional vetting around credentials, insurance? Chad, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know you talk to a lot of freight brokers and their practices, where they've been and maybe where they're headed.
I think it's ever evolving. And if you're not adjusting your carrier vetting process, and that's where we're going to run into problems. And I think today what's happened is when they find this and when they do compromise you, you know, we're seeing more and more situations of 10, 20 plus loads than before. It would be, they would bite off a load or two at a time, and they had to have the personnel to handle it and to figure out how that was going to work. And maybe the driver had to be in on it. Maybe the shipper, the receiver, or a third-party warehouse had to be in on it. Now nobody has to be in on it. Now they can impersonate everybody. And so I think carrier vetting, as we look at that today, and you look at different things you're doing, you've got to be adjusting for, you know, to be able to understand the tactics that they change. And once they do find a weakness, they're going to hit again and again. And then they're going to, you know, when you shut it down, they're going to disappear, but then a new tactic emerges and they're going to take that and pressure test everybody again. And you're going to keep getting tested until you plug that hole. And then they're going to hit everybody else, and then they're going to circle back and do it again. So I think we've seen that repeatedly. We've seen that this year more so than any time in the past, that there's a lot more force and certainly a lot more ability to do this and to do it remotely, where before you feared a truck stop, a theft at a truck stop, and you have all these resources to kind of protect against that, and where you should and shouldn't stop, where from a fraud perspective, from a theft perspective. But today, this can literally happen anywhere in the country, and if a broker's not constantly refining their carrier vetting, and there are third-party services out there that are doing a good job looking at ways to verify identity, looking at ways to detect who is going to commit fraud. And so I think right now, the more defenses you can put up, the better.
Scott, what other advice do you give for people to improve their vetting process?
Well, Chad's spot on. I'll just go a little deeper into some of the things that he said. So, in the cargo theft world, we've always said it's a constant chess match. So they monitor what we do as an industry as much as we monitor what they do, right? So we monitor what they do, we see what they do, we see how they attack the supply chain and go after the cargo, and we adjust. We go out, as an example, we'll go out and work with our clients, teach them how to prevent those types of thefts. We see what they're doing today. We have our cargo theft investigation team, so we hear from them every day what's happening at that ground level. We float that up to our clients. Our clients will make the adjustments, and 2-3 months later, the thieves will adjust to those adjustments, right? So they monitor us as much as we monitor them, and it's always been that way, and it's ongoing. So, Chad mentioned there are third-party organizations, third-party companies coming out that'll help you vet your carriers and help you verify the carriers. The cargo thieves know that those companies are here now, right? So they're going to continue to pressure test that, as Chad said, see where they can find the weaknesses in the armor, so to speak. This sudden shift to the strategic theft over the straight theft is a great example of that, right? They saw more aggressive pursuit of protecting the physical tractor and trailer out there. They saw law enforcement dedication. If you go back just a few years, Georgia had the GBI Cargo Theft Task Force, probably one of the best task forces in the country. They had 10 to 14 investigators, depending on the year you were talking about, and they were breaking up organized group after organized group, and they were cooperating very heavily with the Miami-Dade task force. There were some great results going on there. Well, what's the adjustment to that? Well, the adjustment to that is I don't want to be there. I don't want to be there at the truck stop stealing the trailer. I don't want to be there at the warehouse stealing the trailer. So how do I make that adjustment? Well, I learn how to steal it remotely. Right. So now I can, sit at a computer. I don't even have to be in the United States. I can be in some other country, and I can steal the load virtually wherever it is, and I'm not on site. So all I have to do is disappear virtually if things get hot or I think somebody's on to me. And they're very brash about it. I mean, we've had several reports, and it was talked about yesterday at the TAPA conference that I was at, where, even when they're discovered, when they're called out on the phone, hey, I think you're scamming me, or I think you're doing this, they will come right out and say, yep, and I'm going to keep trying to steal your freight. I'm going to keep coming after your stuff. And then they hang up.
Wow. That's astonishing, the brashness of it. Another angle that's probably just in the last year and a half, the bad guys. They're going onto the FMCSA website, changing contact information. First of all, how are they doing this? How prevalent is this? I don't know, Scott or Chad, which of you want to grab that, because it didn't used to be that way. And by the way, I forgot to mention to our audience, feel free to send in questions through the chat room. Audra will be checking for us, and we'll be weaving in some of those questions throughout today's conversation. Go ahead, Scott.
I would take one step back and say that what they're doing is purchasing MC numbers, right? So Thom, you're very aware of the current economy in transportation industry. Chad, you and I talk about this frequently, right? You're seeing a lot of the smaller onesies, twosies close up shop, go out of business, go back to being a contract carrier or working for somebody. And so, you know, these rings will approach people or have somebody approach people. Hey, we'll buy your MC number and your sign-ons and things like that. So when you say they're going on the FMCSA website, they're going on there as the new owner of the MC number. And then they change the contact information, right? So what happens is they sell that, they keep everything else the same, they just change the contact information, and then they'll commit theft with that MC number that they've just recently acquired. They'll commit as many thefts as they can before it gets posted everywhere that, hey, you know, be aware this MC number is tied to this group or has had numerous amount of thefts, and they'll move on to the next one. One of the things I always talk about is cargo thieves are really great at ROI. They understand ROI. If I spend $5,000 to steal 6 loads at $150,000, I'm doing pretty well. And the $5,000 seed money that they need came from the previous 6 loads that they stole. So it's not like they're making a personal investment into this, right? And so that's what you're seeing with that.
And we're seeing it, I would say, you know, we hear about it from motor carriers, and, you know, I think just the frequency of that happening, and even talking and hearing from our team members that have interacted with our customers, and the number of offers that they get that are out of the blue to purchase their MC number. And along with that, sometimes subsequently, they want to log into any of the freight brokers' websites, your load board.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll keep paying your insurance. No, just don't make another payment. By the way, can I have your email address? And then suddenly they're in business, and what was a reputable carrier that may have been vetted by any number of third-party services suddenly is now rogue, and maybe they can even go online and take these, and they're not even in the US. They have no intention in a lot of those cases, not always, Scott, we talked about that, but of making a payment on that insurance, and they hit really quick, they disappear. And they actually did make a legitimate payment to the former owner, per se, of the company. But in reality, this was not a formal sale of the business. This was an illegitimate, typically paid through a third-party payment app. And the motor carrier puts it in their pocket, and he or she knows they're going to be turning in their truck anyways. They don't want the truck. They literally just want that active authority, even if it's going to be active for another 3 weeks. That's enough time to do a lot of damage.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Chad makes a great point about it, is that, you know, for the person selling that MC number, they may have no idea. It's not uncommon for it to be a legitimate approach to purchase an MC number as well, right? So you don't know. And if you're not going to use that MC number again, and somebody's going to offer you $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, right? You
Yeah.
get rid of it.
Well, and you think about the climate of the last 12 months as the freight market went from, you know, okay to at one point red hot, then normalized, okay, a little bit of a slump, and then nasty. And well, in this nasty stage of the last 9 to 12 months, people are really desperate for some sort of cash after they gave it their best during this cycle. So seeing more of those sold than would have been sold in 21 when things were red hot. So there's a question from the audience here that says, what specific things do you as a service do to vet for fraudulent carriers? I don't know if we want to address that now or when we kind of talk about some of the red flags, but I think maybe in the spirit of it, we'll have that in our mind as we march forward here. But let's kind of shift it a little bit to some red flags. You know, and this is by no means totally comprehensive, but there are things that folks have talked about. So Chad, you know, if you were on the freight brokerage side and someone called in 10, 15 days to get a load, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
You know, I think booking far in advance, not negotiating on rates, especially you know, generally speaking, like a newer entrant to the market,
Yep.
taking a load that's 7 or 10 days out in advance just seems a little bit odd. It's a call in, you've posted it on a load board, and they don't negotiate very much. Maybe they ask questions about the commodity or the value of the load. They want to know where it's picking up from. They're anxious to get the load confirmation. In a lot of cases, even closer in, the driver might call in for the pickup number on that shipment prior to you even sending a load confirmation. Like, all of those things are red flags. I mean, there's so many and so many ways to kind of, and oftentimes you've got, depending on the setup of a freight brokerage, whether it's cradle to grave or split buy sell. I mean, I think oftentimes you know, certainly the loads, the carriers that you don't work with frequently, there's certainly more risk there because you don't have an established relationship. But, you know, anybody, anytime you're using a motor carrier for the first time, anytime you're vetting them initially, that's where you've got to really put your defenses up. But you also can't take for granted just the numbers of ways that you can be deceived through impersonation, new contact names, there's so many ways we're seeing this happen. So, you know, I would say the red flag though, initially, you know, failure to negotiate, you know, they call in, it's, you know, if you've got a way to look at the voice over IP, where that's coming from, you call them carrier back and somebody else answers and they're not there.
Yep.
Any number of ways that kind of raise the caution flags.
Scott, do you want to add to that, or did Chad cover it all?
Well, Chad's biggest point, that there's a ton of them, is the most accurate part, right? All the things he said were accurate, but that's the thing that jumps out at you is, as we sit here today, the number of red flags is tenfold what it used to be. You know, things like, you know, Chad, we've talked about this, you know, they say, hey, we can take 6 or 7 loads, but you go on their FMCSA profile and it says they have 2 trucks, right? Okay, well, how are you going to handle 6 or 7 loads, right? You know, they say that they operate across the US, but they only have inspections in the Southeast. Or, you know, if you run you know, there's various software systems out there where you can run reports on the trucking companies, and it may say that they have box trucks, but they're trying to pick up a full truckload. They don't have any inspections, right? They say they've been in business for 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years. They don't have any inspections. How do you not have any inspections, right?
What about if you see a phone number and it's tied to 6, 8, 20 different MC numbers? Is there a number where you start to get concerned there? I mean, we've all seen articles in the last year. I forget, some town out west where the population of the town was like 11,000 and somehow there were over 50,000 motor carriers out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think all those things are details that you have to take a look at now. I think, you know, pay close attention. If you're as a freight broker, if you have a carrier packet that you ask them to fill out, pay close attention to the information that they put in that carrier packet, right? Does it say that their location is in North Carolina, but the phone number comes back to Miami, or it's a virtual phone number and it's out of the country? One of the things we see them do quite often, if they don't get the person's email when they buy the MC number, you know, let's say that the old owner was chad@abctrucking.com, they'll create an email that's similar, which will be chad.abctrucking@younameit.com, right? So it looks pretty similar, but it's actually not similar. It doesn't have that same domain ending, right? So pay close attention to the carrier packet. You know, one of the things I talk about sometimes is there's almost 1 million trucking companies registered in the United States. If somebody doesn't want to provide all the information you need in your carrier packet, move on to the next trucking company, right? You don't need to, if you have to drag the information out of them, if they don't want to provide you with certain information, that might be a red flag, right? So there's a ton of them, as Chad said.
So I think I'm hearing in part that a lot of the information that we would have taken at face value 5 or 10 years ago probably needs to be looked at just a little bit longer for, has the email domain been changed by a letter or 2? The number of MCs behind that phone number, how many MCs are, there's just a lot of things that you didn't have to look at with a suspicious eye. And the folks that are succeeding and winning this battle are spending a little bit of extra time to make sure they're not being gamed up front. Chad, you mentioned the lack of negotiation on rates, which is really kind of odd because if you think about it, the rates stink right now.
Yeah.
So you'd think somebody would want to be asking for an extra $50 or $150 per load. And if rate's not an issue, again, that should be something, maybe it's not part of the vetting, but it should be high alert. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, I think just given the current environment and given any environment, frankly, it's just the general nature, unless you're in an environment where it's a repeat motor carrier that is taking that Chicago to St. Louis lane every Wednesday for this amount. There's generally some negotiation that happens, and obviously there's certain platforms out there today in our space that that's not as prevalent, but either way, we typically see negotiation where they're going to try to gain more, and so it's like the suddenly that nothing happens there. They're quick to want to get the information. They get the information, and we've heard about this actually a couple times in the past couple of weeks. I've heard this on they're going and even getting the load and maybe trying to get it well in advance. They have the pickup number, truck falls off the load. They call back and cancel it. You don't think anything about it as the freight broker, but maybe they've done this to several loads coming out of a particular area. They do it over a few weeks. There's some TMS systems that may not even document that the truck's fallen off. I know a lot of them do, but suddenly they have these old confirmations they've canceled. Those confirmations are as good as having the load. So when you send them that confirmation, that's as good as an active load still in their mind. They're going to show up a little bit early, or they're going to have somebody else show up a little bit early. It's going to be double brokered, probably, maybe. And they've got all the information they need to get the load. And when the legitimate carrier shows up and the load's not there, how did this get stolen? And it adds a level of murkiness to what's happening out there. So we've seen more of that, but certainly lack of negotiation, days in advance, very interested in quick pay options, any number of things that, just kind of raise a red flag that say this may not be a legitimate motor carrier. This may be a carrier that, we shouldn't out of the gates have given them a $150,000 shipment. And a lot of times ask him about the commodity and wanting detail. Oh, that's coming out of so-and-so, as to kind of let you say, yeah, that is actually coming out of the copper facility down in this particular market. They're okay. That's what I thought. Yeah, I've hauled out of there before. I'll take that load.
So a listener just emailed, we've seen examples of a carrier or carriers that have been inspected, but the FMCSA has not posted the inspection. It may have occurred some time ago. Have either of you heard that the FMCSA is way behind in getting inspections updated?
I have not heard that, no.
No, have I either. I mean,
I'm not surprised to hear it, but yeah, we're one step back from the front line. We're supporting our customers who are actually dealing with the carriers, but they may have heard of it. Feel free, if you're a carrier listening in or a broker, to affirm that. So let's talk about something that's been a real positive for companies, but also represents a little bit of a challenge, and that is third-party dispatch services. We know it's difficult to get good labor here in the United States. We know why outsourcing has occurred and all that, but it also may be creating some issues that the old verification process is not up to snuff on. So, Chad, maybe let me just throw it your way. Do you believe that brokers and motor carriers should have as part of their questioning to ask whether it's a third-party dispatch service and/or any other advice around that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, that's essential. I think when you're setting up who is authorized, and you verify those sources that are authorized, and you have those contacts as part of that. Certainly, those contacts may change too, and it's important to stay up to date. And when there's a new contact or any type of change in phone number, email address, information on FMCSA, any of those things should, tip you off that you need to vet that motor carrier further. And there are reputable dispatch services out there. We obviously insure a large number of motor carriers as well, who are also, like the freight brokers, struggling. Oftentimes we even see them, they're the motor carrier and the freight broker, and nobody knows who's right. And I don't even know if either party knows who's right, because either party could have been impersonated, but the dispatch services add another layer into that. And so it is another instance where fraud can be perpetrated. And so you've got to be able to vet that motor carrier. And you should honestly treat that dispatch service as if they're an extension and that contact as an extension of the motor carrier. But I think from time to time, that contact, the motor carrier can lose. They could have been previously represented by that dispatch service and they no longer are. So to me, there's always got to be this level of transparency and communication back to the actual carrier as opposed to relying on a third party.
Well, and I don't think it hurts to ask up front, is this part of your company? Are you using a third-party dispatch? Again, a lot of ways to catch fraud are not so much that there's a playbook, it's just being alert to how rapid the market has changed, noticing changes in addresses, emails, phone numbers coming from outside the US. As Scott mentioned in the beginning, it's become a global game for thieves to focus on North American freight. So there's a lot of things going on here. I do want to acknowledge one of the listeners' questions here. We are Switzerland at Reliance. In other words, we're kind of neutral on not necessarily recommending different vendors. The question is, what are the best websites to vet carriers? She mentions Carrier 411 and Highway. There's a whole long list of them, RMIS. We don't really want to get into that. But we know a lot of these folks have put extra resources in the last year or more because of how prevalent theft is. So at least I wanted to acknowledge the listener's question there. So let's go back just a little bit more. We're still kind of in the subject of red flags, but also some real life examples here. Obviously, there's going to be times where a different motor carrier or driver needs to be assigned to a load after an earlier notification. There may be a roadside breakdown, the driver quit, weather issues, any number of things. However, this is where kind of all eyes being alert comes into play. When a dispatch service does that without informing the broker, should that be viewed as a red flag? It would seem to me that if they're going to really be a true partnership, they'd want to say, hey, listen, here's what happened. We may have an alternative carrier for you. Or are we okay to move ahead, as opposed to just doing it and then all of a sudden you're in a vulnerable spot? Chad, what do you think about that?
I think at the end of the day, you have to treat every carrier relationship as a freight broker, as its own unique relationship. And if a dispatch service is, maybe that's a legitimate thing. I find it, especially in this environment, very happenstance suddenly that one truck has fallen off, another is able to take it. Typically when that happens, they're not even informing you. So I would be very suspicious of anything like that. And particularly when it occurs at the last minute, somebody calls and cancels a shipment. Hey, but I've got another truck with this different carrier available. Just, I would view that with a lot of suspicion. I think just generally speaking, every carrier's merits has got to stand on its own. And really the way you combat this is repeat business with the same carriers, reputable carriers, where you have a relationship that have been in business, that have been verified. There's so many good motor carriers out there. To take a risk with somebody new, they've really got to be vetted, and you've got to walk into that relationship. And there should be some type of probationary period. We, Reliance, we insure many new entrants to the market, but at the same time, those carriers, we want to see them succeed, but sometimes that's part of the process of learning to run the trucking company and building your reputation up with your freight broker partners.
So Chad, there's kind of two aspects to new. There's new to your organization, and then there's new to the marketplace. So I think it's important, for that to be kept in mind there, because if a freight broker is going to grow over time, they need to be consistently adding capacity,
Sure.
Motor carriers, but you never know what's behind each of them. So I think just that mindset, again, who you dealing with, maybe you start with some lower value added loads. Maybe they're a little bit more local in nature as opposed to cross country. There's some common sense steps that your organization can take while you're testing that carrier's reliability and authenticity. Let me just kind of throw this out here. Do brokers give out pickup numbers too quick in the process? Because that can be an issue. If you know the pickup number, just any thoughts around that?
I mean, Scott, from my perspective, it's always been, one, as a freight broker, you have to be very careful now with both from a liability perspective as it relates to freight broker auto liability being brought into these lawsuits, whether it be for, you exercise some type of control of the motor carrier. We've always kind of advised against, you don't want to do that. It happens, in a lot of brokerages where that still happens, where somebody calls in, they give them the information, and oftentimes too, we've even seen scenarios where they've called in, they've got the pickup number for the load. I'm the driver calling for the pickup number. I was operating here to here, and sometimes it can be as simple as they see a load posting, they see a name, and they've had success there before, and they can call and get the pickup number even. So, we strongly advise that needs to, again, it's not our business. We sell, transportation insurance, but, acting as a dispatcher, giving out information over the phone, it's, somewhat inviting problems.
Well, if you wait to give the pickup number until the driver arrives at the location, then it gives you a chance to validate the MC number, the DOT number on site, as opposed to he or she's already got the pickup number. They can kind of get in and get out. Nobody notices them. Scott, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, a couple of things. If I go back just a little bit to the dispatch services and everything like that, I think, at all levels, you need to know exactly who you're doing business with, right? And so you need to know if somebody is a dispatch service or if they are the carrier that's going to be hauling the freight for you. And if they are a dispatch service and you're okay with that, then you need to know that they are an extension of your process about vetting carriers, right? So you have to set that up so that, the process doesn't end with you vetting that dispatch service. The process continues with that dispatch service vetting anybody who's going to carry your load, if that's the way you choose to do business. Now, when it comes to, the pickup number or the information like that, I think in the current environment, you should control all vital information related to the load as long and as much as you can, so that you can work in a partnership with your shippers at the point of pickup to verify who's picking up the load and be confident who's picking up the load. It's, if you give out a shipper, if you give out the load number and then you change the carrier, now you're in a scramble with your shipping partner to change the carrier information, make sure that gets trickled down to the exact point of pickup, that the person that's standing at the dock is not looking at the first one you gave out, but now looking at the second one that you corrected it to. It creates confusion. And when things are moving as fast and as high volume as they do in the transportation industry, the last thing you want is confusion and mistakes.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be very, very methodical, and you have to have a good process in place. When we work with our clients to teach them methods on how to prevent these types of thefts, the thing we concentrate on the most is the process and the procedures section of it. We say it's a 3-layered approach. And that first foundational portion of it is good process and procedures. Because everything after that will work or not work based on what those process and procedures are at the foundation of the whole system.
Chad, I know you've got a thought. I want to just throw out a couple other examples. I talked to a carrier the other day in preparation for this, and this kind of goes back to the original listener question on ways to detect fraud. Notice that they pause a lot on basic questions. For example, if you ask them, well, what kind of tractor or trailer do you have? They should be able to tell you. It's a Freightliner, it's a Peterbilt, I'm driving a Wabash trailer. Is it a box truck? If they pause, if they really act undecided, that should be an immediate red flag. If Chad mentioned earlier, if they're very rushed, I got to have this information right now. I got to get the load information. Rates don't matter, whatever, just, again, it's human behavior you're looking for. It's not always going to be on a checklist of things, but suspicious behavior. If they laugh funny, again, raise your level of awareness. But Chad, I know the environment and cargo theft, they kind of go hand in hand. What are some of your observations there?
I think what we've seen over time is oftentimes when you do see a theft occur, and I think now, and Scott really, he'll have a lot of thoughts on this, but what we've seen in the past have generally been these cross-country runs that are high value. Now, or they're something that can easily be, disposed of, that's a commodity. I can remember a few years ago, loads of nuts coming out of California. That was one of the most targeted commodities in the country. Now it seems like that list of targeted commodities has expanded dramatically, and every commodity can be targeted, but the cross-country run still seems to be a lot of these longer length of hauls where there's a longer transit time. There's more time to, before the broker knows the load has been stolen, there's more time to cross-dock the loads. That still seems to be a lot of the cargo theft instances that we have reported to us, but we're also seeing more of these that are quick one-day turns. And we've even seen things happen where, and heard of this, and I know of one instance where a large number of loads were stolen, and they were double brokered. They actually faked the delivery of the loads. They sent in the bill of lading to the freight broker. The freight broker actually charged the shipper for the loads, didn't know they were stolen. The shipper actually paid them. And then 6 months later, they came back and found out, oh, these loads, not only were they not delivered, we charged our customer for it. We were paid for it. We paid the carrier that just stole the loads for them. And not only that, now at an audit, an inventory audit, they've discovered that these weren't. So, but we're seeing this stuff happen all over, and I always enjoy hearing from Scott on kind of areas of the country. And I know a lot of the usual suspects, but I'd be interested to hear Scott's thought.
Let me modify that.
Commentary.
As we head in, we're on the cusp of winter, Scott. So as we think about the next 3 or 4 months, what are the hot spots, to Chad's point, and what are some of the commodities? And then we'll kind of break that question down a little bit more as we get past winter as well. What should people be on guard for?
Yeah, sure. A lot to talk about on this one. So let's start with location. So we talked about the fact that the increases in strategic theft have kind of spread cargo theft out, but straight theft still remains the #1 type of theft. It's just that strategic theft has seen the largest increases. So straight theft is really still dictating the majority of where the cargo thefts are happening, and that remains the normal hotspot. So it's Southern California, it's Texas, it's Florida, it's Georgia, it's Memphis, it's Illinois, New Jersey. Those remain the #1 spots, right? What do they all have in common? Well, most of them are port areas, right? Most of them have a large port area. They also have high population density. They all have very strong economic situations, right? So they kind of have the perfect storm. They have all the facilities where the goods are kept and distributed out of. They have the ports. They have the trucking company concentrations. They have the population. They have all that. Illinois and Memphis are going to be, inland ports because of the rail, right? Memphis in particular has all the arterial highways that connect there. So it creates a little bit of a scenario where everybody's coming in from everywhere and the freight's sitting at all the truck stops in that area. So there's various reasons that go behind that. Those areas continue to be the hot spots, but we are continuing to see that spread. So one of the heat maps that I use when I teach classes on this shows the spread that's spreading into the interior. So, places like Oklahoma, Iowa, Wyoming, they are seeing thefts, and we're seeing thefts reported in those areas. So remember the high concentration areas and the most common places, but understand that it is spreading everywhere at this point as well. When you talk about the commodities are very cyclical. And this is where you talked earlier about what are some of the impacts on cargo theft. And I said the economy will sometimes have more of an impact on what's stolen rather than how much is stolen. So right now, food and beverage is the #1 stolen commodity. If we go just a little bit historic on it, don't want to go too far down, but 2008, right after 2008, coming into 2008, electronics was #1. Everybody was spending money on luxury items. We have an economic downturn. By 2010, food and beverage becomes the #1 stolen commodity, and it stays the #1 stolen commodity until 2019. Now, we know in 2010 they went to that commodity for the economic situation, but we also realized that they quickly learned, hey, this is a great commodity for us. There's, Chad mentioned nuts in 2015, 2016, we saw massive spikes in nut thefts. Well, there's no barcode on a pistachio. You don't activate the warranty for almonds on the internet. So we can't ping your location when you steal the almonds, right? It's very untraceable. From a cargo theft investigation standpoint, I can chase a load of stolen televisions for a year. I have a week window on food related items that are perishable, right? So they switched that food and beverage commodity. They love it. The number, then you have to think about the subcategories in there, and we'll get into that in a second. So 2020, the pandemic hits, and we see household goods become number one. Number one rule for cargo thieves is I'm going to steal what I know I can sell. So household goods becomes number one in 2020. Why? Because we were all at home. We're all modifying our homes. We were remodeling. We were working from home. We were creating home gyms. We were just trying to make it a more pleasant place to be 24/7 because that's where we were. 2021, it becomes electronics again. Why? Because there was a shortage on chips that we heard about, right? So they take advantage of that. They knew that children were educating from home. People were working from home. We needed laptops. We needed tablets, you name it. So they moved to that. 2022, about halfway through the year, electronics drops off. Food and beverage comes back in, household goods. It's a bit of a mix. 2022 is a really tight year for those top three categories. Here we are in 2023, and it's food and beverage again, right? And what I always say is when things normalize even a little bit, even though we're seeing, struggles in the transportation industry and everything, when things normalize even a little bit, that food and beverage commodity will float to the top. It will be number one, right? Now, when you talk about seasonality of it, well, let's talk about the subcategories. Every year, there's a couple of subcategories that really pop. 2015, 2016, it was the nuts. They really popped. It went crazy. Right now, it's solar panels in that electronics commodity, right? So solar panels are really popping, and they're being targeted heavily in Southern California. In the food and beverage category, it's energy drinks and alcohol. In the third quarter CargoNet report that I saw, energy drinks and alcohol in the detail were one theft off of one another. So they were right there as the two leading commodities in the food and beverage category. So you're going to see these subcategories within those bigger categories pop. It's holiday season. So you're going to see game consoles targeted, right? You're going to see electronics. Anything that looks like it's going to be popular for the holidays, they're going to target it, right? So I always say we're not the only ones Christmas shopping. They're Christmas shopping as well, right? they're going to target the same things we are because they know that's what everybody wants. So I would say those, high level with some detail. There's a lot of information there.
Kind of using that, Scott, as a launching point. So get past Christmas, the slowness of January, February, maybe food and beverage remain top. But as we start to think about warmer weather, March and beyond, should we expect maybe outdoor patio furniture, sporting goods, things like that also to be areas that the thieves would target?
We see some of those things. We don't see big fluctuations in those areas. We will see things like tractors or, outdoor, we've seen loads of motorcycles targeted at certain times of the year, the off-road vehicles, whatever you want to label them as, kind of the, that you can take out on the dirt roads and everything like that. We've seen some of those stolen across the industry. So, they will make some shifts on that. I think it's more so the larger demand stuff. They look for what's the most popular category overall, rather than some of those what I would call micro categories. Mm-hmm. There was something I was going to mention in there, and I'm forgetting what it was, but I'll think of it and I'll throw it out to you when I think of it.
Well, we're down to our last few minutes, so I just wanted to encourage the listeners that if there's a question or two they want to get in, we're still taking those questions. Another red flag, so to speak, would be if you're speaking to someone and they're reluctant to provide any information about the driver. If they're hostile to doing that, or they completely have no idea about it, again, your radar should be up for that. They should be able to talk to you about the driver. Yep. Chad, what else in your career here? Just have you seen any new wrinkles just in the last? I know talked about it a little bit earlier on, but just as you work with so many of our customers on claims this year, any favorite war story or two that represents a good lesson?
I think there are so many, and we could sit and talk about these. Scott and I actually talked about these. We saw each other a couple of weeks ago, and we could have sat down and just gone back and forth on everything. But no, I think one of the, you're seeing the fraud that's being perpetrated, and maybe, through load, it could be through load boards, but not necessarily load boards. I feel like oftentimes the load boards, maybe they provide a channel for it, but they're not the only reason that it's happening. But I would say too, and so locking down your access to your email address, having multi-factor authentication, we see a lot of that. We, as an insurance agency are targeted just like all insurance providers are, and transportation providers more and more. I think what we're seeing now is that maybe somebody is compromised on their email password at home, and, the thief, the person who perpetrates that realizes, oh, they have a company address, and suddenly they can get access to that. And or somebody gets your email password at work, and it's the same as what it is on the load board. Now, I know MFA is something that's been becoming more commonplace. So I would encourage everybody on that front to have multi-factor authentication, because any way, shape, or form somebody gains access to this, they get access to your email, and suddenly they have access to maybe the a load board, or maybe they have access to go on and commit fraud that way. The other thing that's been interesting is we're hearing more instances where now we're seeing pretend customers pop up that are calling into freight brokers and wanting to have freight moved. And they're illegitimate customers, but they're pretending to be somebody else. And there's a twist on that and how they can monetize that. So you think of it, it feels like it's happening. I mean, we're seeing all different types of fraud. And I feel like there's been more new schemes that are emerged in the last 6 months than happened in the last 6 years.
I think two things that are really worth talking about, Thom. One is trust your gut, right? So we're talking about red flags, and Chad's talking about all the different things you see. And one of the things we mentioned earlier is that these things change, and they kind of bob and weave as we make changes to try and prevent this stuff. You really have to trust your gut. Something that we tell our clients is, don't just train your head of risk or your head of security, depending on what role you have or position you have at the company, but train those people on the front line, the people that are assigning the loads. Raise their awareness of what goes on. Teach them the red flags. Make sure you're constantly updating their knowledge and keeping it up to date with the industry knowledge, right? And when, let's say, Chad and I are working together and we're assigning loads for a company, and Chad figures something out, he sniffs something out, and everybody agrees, yeah, don't assign that load. That's a theft in waiting, or a theft waiting to happen. You need to take what Chad saw and use that to educate the entire team. Hey, quick stand-up meeting, 10 minutes. Chad figured this out because he saw this, and this, right? Share that knowledge and share it instantaneously. The second thing that I would mention that I can't stress enough is you have to have a plan. If you experience a theft, you have to have a plan, and you need to pressure test that plan. One of the things we talk about very often is, who is going to pick up the phone for you at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday and immediately begin to work for you to help recover the theft if you've had a theft, right? For our clients, we certainly have that service. We have our team. Chad and I talk about this quite often. Who are you going to call, and are they going to pick up the phone? And do you have a secondary number to call and a third number to call? Certainly, you always call law enforcement first if you're the victim of a theft. But after that, who are you calling? And then even if you call law enforcement, or you call somebody who you know will pick up the phone, do you have all the right information that's going to enable that person, law enforcement or private resource, to actually begin working a case to try and recover a load? Now, an example of, every once in a while you get a call, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, the driver came, if we talk about a straight theft, the driver came out of the truck stop and the tractor and everything was gone. Okay, well, what was the tractor number? Well, I don't have it. I'm the night dispatcher. I don't have that. Okay, does the driver remember the number? No, he doesn't remember the number. What's the trailer number? Well, with somebody else's trailer, we hooked to it. Okay, what's on the bill of lading? What was in the tractor? Okay, well, so here I am at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I know you've had a theft, and that's all I know. That's all I know, and I don't, and I extremely limited on what I can do for you, right? So do you have all that information available? Do you know, who you were talking to, or think you know? Do you have phone numbers, or, any information that's related to that? Is the person that's working for you at 2 o'clock in the morning going to be able to relay that information to the resource that you're going to reach out to? And you should run tests on that. You should come into work one day and say, hey, Chad, we just had a $250,000 load stolen. What are you going to do? Right? And Chad should be able to tell you, well, I'm going to do this. Tom's going to do this. Scott's going to do this. And everybody should know their roles. It's the same as running a play for a football team. Every position that goes on the field to run that play knows their route, knows exactly what their assignment is, and they go out and they execute it. They don't turn to each other and say, hey, do you want to run this route and then I'll run that route and so-and-so will get the handoff, or do you want so-and-so to take the turn getting the handoff? That's not how it works. You go out, you execute the play, and it's the same as your response. Your response has to be something that you can execute instantaneously and turn on a dime.
We just had 3 questions sent in, so I'm going to go ahead and go through those. But also, Scott, a few minutes ago, you said trust your gut. I would also say train your gut.
Yeah,
in light of the new
for sure.
reality. Someone wants to know if a theft attempt is in progress, is there anything that we can do once you realize it's in progress? I don't know if there's a short answer to that.
I would say notify your insurance company, and that was something I was going to add through all this. You know, Scott, and you know, we share a lot of customers, and the number one thing, you know, for your insurance company to be successful in recovering and mitigating your loss, they have to know about it. If you call them a month later, you know, it's not going to do any good. And Scott, I mean, you see it every day. The notification you get early, I'm sure there's a much greater correlation to recovery.
Yeah, I mean, quick notification. So the industry standard, you know, what's largely talked about in the industry is after the first 24 to 48 hours, your chances at recovery drop by at least 50% or right around 50%. That's a huge drop off. So if your insurance company has the resources to help you with a recovery, then you obviously need to report it to them right away. And whether it's, you know, helping you to recover the load or mitigating the loss or whatever it is through the process of handling the claim, the quicker you notify them, the more efficient and effective they're going to be for you. The same thing goes for law enforcement, notifying them right away. So if you're, you know, to the attendee's question, if you know a theft is in process, I guess my question back would be, you haven't given them the load yet and you know it's in process, or you've given them the load and you know it's in process. Those are 2 different scenarios. If you haven't given them the load, you know it's in process. Depending on where you live, you know, if you're in Southern California, there are task forces in Southern California that are working on those organized crime rings. So, you know, you can contact them and see if they can tie it into a ring, or it rings a bell to them as a ring that they're investigating. You know, it depends on what part of the country you're in. It's never going to hurt to call the police and let them know that you think this is going on actively. If the load's already been stolen, but you're still in contact with them, all the same notifications apply. Law enforcement, your insurance company, any resources you're going to use, whether it's a private investigator, or if you're, you know, a client of ours and we have our investigative team, all those parties should know and know instantaneously.
This comes in from a carrier. If I need to use another carrier's truck to complete my loads because my truck is down for repairs, what paperwork is needed to use the carrier's truck? Would I need to put the truck under my insurance for the short time, few days to a couple of weeks? Do I need to put my company name and DOT numbers on the loaner truck? Either one of you guys.
I mean, you need to reach out to your insurance agent. I mean, that truck is not covered. It hasn't been inspected. I would not advise, you really want to go through the proper channels with that, because you have that inspected. There's a lot of issues there. Maybe what we can do, if I'm not sure who sent this question, but we are happy to talk on that, but that's probably, you know, a little bit more longer and complicated answer than what we want to go through on this call, during this conversation. But yeah, absolutely. That's something you've got to take under consideration, how that's going to look in the long term. And are you insured? Are you not insured? And I think there's a lot of answers, and a lot of it depends on the type of policy you purchase, type of coverage you have, and, you know, the owner of the truck, frankly.
Yeah, Chad's contact information is on the reliancepartners.com website. Scott, someone's asking for your contact information, and we still have one more question to cover, but while we're here, you want to give your phone number and email real quick?
Yeah, my email is scornell1@travelers.com. My last name is spelled with 2 L's, but the email only has 1 L. So it's scornell with 1 L, the number 1 @travelers.com. And I can be reached at 480-585-8983.
Say that number one more time, 480 what?
480-585-8983.
Okay. This last question, I think we kind of covered it throughout the conversation, but if something is double brokered or if a company isn't going to pay for a load, are there red flags? I think they're asking ahead of time, even though they didn't word that. I'm not sure that there are outside of some of the general guidelines that we've talked about being alert, but maybe I've missed something, Chad or Scott?
I think the question maybe is being asked more from a motor carrier standpoint, which
Okay.
again is actually something we haven't talked about probably enough on here. That, you know, as a motor carrier, what are red flags? One, what's the broker's credit? Two, if it's a reputable broker that you know of that you're set up with, is there a, you know, when you're going through a load board and you click on that, is there kind of a different phone number listed there? Maybe a free form message with that phone number. That's a good way to tell that maybe it's a legitimate freight broker, but maybe that login has been compromised and you should question that. I would also say that if you're picking up at a particular shipper and you're told to use a name other than the freight broker that you're working with, that, hey, you're going to say you're picking up for this company, or the bill of lading is actually going to say this, but you're going to do this. Or, hey, you get a call in the middle of the shipment and you're being redirected somewhere else.
Yep.
If you get a call and but they're going to pay you very, very well for it, but this is the first time you've dealt with this freight broker, any of those things should make you skeptical that maybe you are party to this deception, and maybe you're going to be taken advantage of and not be paid for the shipment. Maybe you're helping them commit theft.
Change
Yeah,
of
I think the last part was a great point, Chad, is if they tell you, hey, go pick up this load and we'll give you the new the new delivery location after you pick it up, call us, we'll give you a new delivery location. Or they suddenly call and say, hey, yeah, we know we booked you to take this to Texas. We only need you to take it to Phoenix. And we're going to pay you the same, right? We're going to pay you the same, even though you're not going as far, because it's our fault, but we just need you to take it to this cross dock or this warehouse or this, you know, be aware of that, right? As something that has been seen very commonly as a way to, you know, get somebody involved in moving the freight where they want it to be moved. And then also if they give you a location and it's just a dirt lot somewhere, you know, all of a sudden you're not going to a facility or something, you're just going to a dirt lot. Chad talked about those nut thefts earlier. One of the cases that got busted on those nut thefts was a driver who was redirected to a dirt lot and just asked to drop the trailer for another tractor in the dirt lot. And he thought it was a little suspicious, so he took a picture of that tractor, and that tractor ended up tied to one of the rings, and he supplied that to the California Highway Patrol. And that ended up being a big lead, right? So you just have to pay attention to those things.
A listener said another red flag for carriers is rates that are too good to be true. We alluded to that, but I mean, in this market where rates are horrible, the fact that they wouldn't ask to get a little bit more and you're getting transportation for very little price, that should be a red flag. Absolutely.
Yeah, if it sounds too good to be true,
yeah,
it is too good to be true.
Well, and even in a bull market, when rates are up, if they're not asking for more, that could be a little bit of a red flag. It may not seem as compelling because it's a bull market, but in a market where you can ask for more and they're not, that should be something you want to train your people about.
Sure.
So, well, listen, we're out of time here. I want to thank all of our listeners who participated. Thank you for the questions. We are starting to put this out. It will be on YouTube here in a couple of days. So check with me or just check with Reliance and we'll make that available. Audra, I think, will probably be sending that out to those that listen today. And in 2024, we hope to move to more of a formal podcast format. So it should be great. Looking forward to it. We expect to have our next one sometime in the first 7 to 10 days of January. On behalf of the Reliance team, Chad, I want to thank you. Scott, thanks so much. We want to wish everyone a happy holidays and a Merry Christmas and safe cargo through the end of the year and beyond. Take care.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.